Homer's Iliad is arguably one of the most famous works of Western literature. When one thinks of Homer's Iliad, they think of war. Images of the greatest warrior, undoubtedly now influenced by Wolfgang Petersen's film adaptation, which I actually enjoy, Achilles, often rockets into the minds of readers. Blood, carnage, and war are the images that we generally associate with the epic. We may even erroneously think it is the Greek equivalent of the Bible, with our apocryphal stories handed down to us of Alexander the Great sleeping with it on his conquest of Persia. The Iliad, however, is not a work that celebrates the horror of war, but one that unmasks and deconstructs the horror of war. Over the course of this undressing of the naked brutality of war and the capricious gods, Homer asserts the humanism of love as the most heroic reality of human life and existence. Achilles is the hero of the Iliad. The epic opens in song to Achilles. Rage, goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles. That the song centers on Achilles, a mortal, is important. Though a demigod, his association with the wrath of the divines is revealed through the use of the word mene, a word exclusively used for the rage of the gods, and not men. So Achilles is introduced as something of a divine-like figure, his divinity tied to rage, wrath, death, and destruction, those images so often replete in Greek theology. Yet Achilles, as we know, is also a man, mortal, and therefore also a lover. For love is only something experienced and shown in the human world of Homer's great epic. This too is something the reader must be aware of when spanning through the pages of Homer's great work. All the instances of wondrous love that warm our heart and cause us to remember the landscape of the Iliad are instances of love manifested by humans, and only humans. The gods cannot love, only humans can. That is a subtle and radical statement by our poet, and that journey to humanize himself in love is what the Iliad is all about. How love, through mortality, enters into the cosmos. It is impossible to understand Homer without Hesiod. The two greatest poets of the ancient Greek tradition couldn't have been more different. Hesiod's Theogony sings the praises of gods and wars, violence and lust. Homer sings of men and their love. The gods may both be bloodthirsty and lusty in Hesiod and Homer, but Homer isn't concerned with giving the gods their due piety or praise, as Hesiod is. Moreover, their understanding of the cosmos radically differs. Hesiod's cosmos is moved by lust, leading to violence. Homer's cosmos, though constrained by the dictates of the gods, opens up with the possibility of healing, redemption, and peace through human agency. Hesiod's poem is a celebration of the sublime and dark, grisly violence of the divinities of Olympus. Homer's epic is a deconstruction of the Hesiodic fantasy and a subtle proclamation of the power of human love and agency despite all the forces of death, destruction, and darkness that is arrayed against it. Additionally, Homer invents a word that lands once saturated by the Christian religion are familiar with, agape. Homer has the first written use of the word, and it denotes affection for the dead, a love for the deceased or injured. In other words, a self-giving kindness to someone beloved. The Septuagint translators, seeking to find a Greek word that expressed such compassion they associated with the love of Adonai, borrowed from Homer and brought it into its now elevated biblical and Christian understanding and usage. For Homer's use of the term came closest to expressing a love rooted in merciful compassion to others. Achilles' metamorphosis from divine, inhuman killer to loving human, the man whose act of agape toward Priam brings the epic to its incredible conclusion, is what Homer is ultimately singing about. This should be obvious when we do encounter the war scenes, even without Achilles present, in the fighting that dominates much of the poem. When men die, Homer, though often revealing it in bloody and captivating description of arms and necks being hacked off and blood pouring out of one's bowels, is nevertheless also subtly offset by the tender humanization of the dead. The men who die, Homer also describes, are husbands, fathers, and sons. For example, when you read Homer, you will find that he is often, although dealing with the horror and brutality of death, giving names to the victims, talking about parents and how they will never see their sons again. Homer reminds us that the deceased are the same as you and I, for we are children of parents, parents who love us, parents who will never see us again if we die. The evolution of love, which Homer sings, can bring about healing in a world that is associated with the principal characters, including Priam if we count him. There is the filial love of Hector and also Priam. Then there is the compassion and merciful love, the kindness of Patroclus. Then there is the final manifestation of love represented by Achilles, a love shown to his avowed enemy, Priam. The love we witness is also chronological, insofar that the touching scenes of the love which bring momentary respites of peace and healing is first revealed by Hector, then by Patroclus, and reaching its magnanimous achievement in Achilles. That Hector is a man of filial piety is not lost to any reader of the epic. When Hector's brother, Helenus, persuades Hector to safely return to Troy, he also reminds him of the duty to offer up libations to Athena's shrine, which the pious Prince of Troy does. Inside of Troy, after battle, Hector also instructs the women of the city to pray to the gods. Homer, likewise, describes Hector's heart as racing to help his Trojans all throughout the poem. But the most tender and memorable moment of Hector's filial love comes when he stands on the battlements and walls of the city. War and destruction wage over the city walls. Hector is fully dressed in military garb. His infant son, Astyanax, cowers in fear from the sight of this shadowy and vicious warrior that has now appeared. In a loving moment, Hector disarms and disrobes himself, revealing himself with a human face and caressing hands as he cradles his son and ends his weeping. In the presence of his family, this act of filial love brings momentary peace, a poignant serenity, to the story for all who know Hector's eventual fate. But in this moment, Hector's love triumphs. There is an apocryphal story that is undoubtedly false, but I like to think it to be true. A monk, translating the Iliad, read this scene, and the paper is stained from a human tear. Touching though this filial love is, Homer is also going further and deeper. Filial love is not enough to bring peace to a war-torn world. Hector, as we know, eventually passes Astyanax to Andromache, rearms himself, and ventures out into the chaotic world of death and destruction to continue the war. Yet this human, undivine moment has often been memorialized in painting down through the ages and is a manifestation of the power of love that binds families together in the face of hardship and destruction. Consider it. The world around Hector and his family is crumbling. War is consuming their city. It will consume their city when all said and done. But in the midst of that death and destruction that envelops them, their love brings a brief respite, a beautiful pause, a momentary peace that reminds us of what really matters in life. If filial love, however, is not enough to bring peace and serenity completely to a war-torn world, the love that Homer praises goes beyond and evolves into kindness to the wounded, the injured, and the maimed. We must remember that Hector's great act of filial piety is not shown to the wounded, the injured, or the maimed. Terrified though his son is, his family is in full health. It is the most natural expression of love in the human heart. But the love that goes beyond the family, a love to the wounded, the injured, and the maimed, is the love that moves the heart of Patroclus, the other great hero of the Iliad. Contrary most media depictions, in this case the film Troy, Patroclus was not younger than Achilles. He was the elder individual in the friendship the two shared. Homer, mind you, never associates or uses language implying homoeroticism, though that notion developed in the post-Homeric literary traditions. As an older sage, Patroclus is also a healer. He is a healer of wounded women, Briseis, and wounded men, Eurypylus. The love that Homer attaches to Patroclus is that kindness, compassion, which brings healing into a wounded world. As the Greeks are retreating back to their ships, a severely injured Eurypylus staggers into camp with an arrow wound. Patroclus recognizes his comrade and immediately tends his grave wounds. Without Patroclus's intervention, Eurypylus would have died. It could have been easy for Patroclus to remain indifferent to the sufferings of his comrades, as Achilles was at this time. Instead, in an act of his own volition, Patroclus implicitly defies Achilles' direction not to aid the rest of the Greeks, until Agamemnon humbles himself and begs Achilles' forgiveness for his affront of seizing Briseis. Patroclus, rather than listening to Achilles in tender mercy and kindness toward his wounded brethren, rushes towards them in order to aid them. In specific, in relationship to his healing of Eurypylus, Homer has this to say, and man, it is a very heartwarming moment. And bracing the captain, arm around his waist, he helped him toward his shelter. And Aid saw them and put some ox hides down. Patroclus stretched him out, knelt with a knife, and cut the sharp, stabbing arrow out of Eurypylus' thigh, and washed the wound clean of the dark running blood with clear warm water. Pounding it in his palms, he crushed a bitter root and covered over the gash to kill his comrade's pain, a cure that fought off every kind of pain, and the wound dried, and the flowing blood stopped. Here is yet another beautiful moment of respite, healing in the midst of death and destruction, that Homer gives us in his poem. Patroclus cares to Eurypylus' wound. He cures him of his injury and pain and permits the Greek captain to live on. Patroclus has literally brought healing into this bleak world of death and destruction, healing in the midst of war. This loving kindness, moved by the spirit of mercy towards others, goes beyond the filial love we have just witnessed with Hector. Though Patroclus eventually joins battle to help the Greeks as the Trojans are bearing down on the beachhead, threatening to destroy the ships that are needed to take the soldiers back home, and dies by Hector's hand, the struggle to reclaim Patroclus' body reveals an even greater spirit of kindness from the soul of Patroclus. After the Greeks recover the body of Patroclus and return it to Hector, Briseis arrives and offers a great lament that further reveals the hero's loving kindness, his compassionate soul. But you, Patroclus, you would not let me weep, not when the swift Achilles cut my husband down, not when he plundered the lordly Mynes city, not even weep. No, again and again you vowed you'd make me godlike Achilles' lawful wedded wife. You would sail me west in your warships home to Phthia, and there with the Myrmidons hold my marriage feast. So now I mourn your death. I will never stop, for you were always kind. Kindness. Through Patroclus, Homer is slowly evolving and revealing the heroic power of love in the epic. The love of Patroclus is one step closer to the love that will bring peace and healing to the cosmos. Patroclus, as the other Greek heroes say, was kind to all, as Menelaus says, in remembering Patroclus as he fought to recover his slain body. This was mostly directed to his comrades, his friends, but as revealed by Briseis in that touching lament, also to a wounded enemy, her. That kindness to others, including an outsider, an enemy, is the love that Achilles will now embody from his friend and elevate into a new cosmic dimension in dealing with Priam. Kindness, as revealed in the life of Patroclus, his heroism, extends not only to fellow braves and countrymen, but also to outsiders, enemies who are also wounded and aggrieved by the horror of war, as Briseis was. The death of Patroclus, as we know, inflames the rage of Achilles. He goes on his famous killing spree. He fights gods and men alike. He slays the innocent and defenseless Lycaon. He butchers Trojan soldiers as he cuts a path to Hector. Then he slays Hector and attempts to defile Hector's body and returns to his tent. In this sequence of events, the inhumanity of Achilles is manifested for us to see. Defenseless Lycaon throws himself naked and unarmed at the feet of Achilles, begging for his life. Achilles rebuffs his foe. Drawing his sharp sword, Achilles struck Lycaon's collarbone just beside the neck, and the two-edged blade drove home, plunging to the hilt, and down on the ground he sprawled, stretched face first, and dark blood pouring out of him drenched the earth. Achilles grabbed a foot, slung him into the river, washed away downstream as he cried above him savage words to wing him on his way. That is how Homer describes this awful, grisly scene. In fighting the Scamander River and slaying men left and right, the rage of Achilles is everything wrong with the cosmos. Harshness, cruelty, death, destruction. Hector initially tries to reason with Achilles, but loses his nerve when he sees the ravenous eyes of his foe. As we know, Achilles slays Hector with the help of Athena, furthering Homer's association of the gods with oblique cruelty. The gods help the inhumane. We return now to the question of filial love, when Priam ventures into the tent of Achilles. Achilles, in his rage, had vowed to wipe out the seed of Priam from the face of the earth, to vanish his avowed foe, to bring destruction to those who have harmed him and his soul. Repeating the image of cruelty we have just witnessed with Lycaon throwing himself defenselessly at the feet of Achilles, Priam throws himself at the feet of Achilles, just like his son did, and weeps for mercy and the return of Hector's body. Here, if imagery is meant to repeat itself, Achilles should have slaughtered his foe. Instead, Priam's love for Hector and the filial love that gave him the courage to venture into enemy territory and enter the tent of the murderous Achilles unarmed breaks the capricious heart of the ancient world's most famous killer. Achilles' memory is rekindled with the love of his father, Peleus. He lifts up Priam, not as an enemy, but as a friend. He embraces him in love rather than animosity. We have also witnessed this image of embrace in a dialectic of contrast throughout the epic. There has been the embrace in cruelty and death. There has also been the embrace in compassion and love. Routinely throughout the battle scenes, embrace has been accompanied by death, the two most famous being Achilles with Lycaon and Hector. Then there have been the images of embrace, reflecting and manifesting love. Hector with his family, Patroclus with Eurypylus, Briseis with Patroclus, now Achilles with Priam. This embrace of Priam marks the humanization of Achilles, the culmination of his metamorphosis from the cosmic callousness of the gods, which he has so far been associated with, to the human love of tenderness, mercy, and kindness exhibited by the likes of the other human characters of the story: Hector, Patroclus, Briseis, and Priam. Achilles has a human moment here, and in that human moment he finds his true freedom, freed from that divine rage which previously enslaved him. Without compulsion from the gods or Agamemnon, Achilles' embrace of Priam in love leads the captain of the Myrmidons to not only return the body of Hector for a proper funeral, it leads him to bestow a temporary peace to his enemy in order to give Hector the proper affection due to him. Achilles' action not only reflects a love to Priam, it also reflects a newfound love, a respect, and understanding for Hector, the man he just previously killed. Achilles' act of forgiveness liberates him from his own constraints. Forgiveness here isn't about forgetting. It is about the freedom to live a new life and to chart a new path for the self, despite all that has happened. To embrace a new active spirit in the face of all the adversities that life throws against us. This is what Achilles achieves at the conclusion of the Iliad. And this is what Homer is proclaiming as the most heroic thing any of us can achieve. Centuries later, Aristotle would remark that the kindness shown to an enemy, an outsider, is an embodiment of all that is beautiful and noble. That Homer achieves this in his poetic masterpiece is a testament to his forward thinking and ethical rhetoric. The poet, Homer, who brought the Iliad to its final form, knew the rest of the story as we do. But that's not the story we got. That's not the story we have in the Iliad. Instead, the Iliad ends on a note of peace. A peace that explicitly proclaims that only love, a love directed to our enemies, rooted in forgiveness of the rage and animosity that we previously felt, can bring healing into the world. The heroism that Homer sings of is not war, but love, and it is the exclusive domain of us mortals which makes it so precious. No Trojan horse, no sack and burning of Troy, no death of Achilles. This is not accidental on Homer's part. To end the story on Achilles' embrace of Priam and his bestowing peace to the grieving king is the message that the epic has been working to. It is the message that the poet wishes to communicate to us. Although the Iliad sings of the rage turned to love of Achilles, the last name sung of in the poem is the enemy of the Greeks, the valiant foe of Achilles, the son of Priam, Hector, tamer of horses. From an intertextual perspective, especially in concentration of the imagery and the language employed by Homer, he was far from celebrating gory and destructive violence. Those who read the Iliad as a celebration of war completely miss the point of the poem. On the contrary, Homer deconstructed the destructive, violent fantasy of Hesiod and the pre-Homeric tradition and offered a humanized reading of Greek mythic consciousness, which advanced our own humanist sensibilities, which have reverberated down through the ages. Homer's Iliad is nothing short of a monumental achievement in ushering in a new human consciousness of what matters in life. As we know from the Greek context and cultural memory that lives on forever, the rest of the story still panned out. The Trojan horse, the sack and burning of Troy, the death of Priam, the death of Achilles. But again, that is not what Homer left us. Rather, Homer left us with a world at peace, brought forth by an act of love, of forgiveness, compassion, and mercy to an enemy. Homer inverts the world we know from Hesiod and the story that his compatriots knew very well. That world of dark gods and cruel violence that characterizes Hesiod's cosmos is still part of Homer's cosmos, that is true. But Homer opens the cosmos to human agency, an agency principally tied to the love that is absent the nature of the gods, but is part of the heroic aspect of human nature. For the most heroic part of human nature is our capacity to love. For the gods cannot and do not love. Only humans love, Homer is telling us. Homer's Iliad is, in fact, a love story of epic, cosmic proportions. It captures the totality of the human condition: rage, wrath, war, death, destruction, but also romance, passion, love, mercy, and hope. Hope in love and forgiveness to an enemy. That is why it stands unrivaled in the history of human literature and will continue to be read for all eternity.